Okay, so you know how sometimes it feels like the stars align and boom, you're flooded with awesome ideas, right? Like there's this hidden wellspring of inspiration inside you just waiting to be tapped. You want to find that feeling more often. And I think this Better Up article you sent might have the answer. It's called How to Get Inspired, 15 Simple Ways to Reach Your Potential. And it really got me thinking, what if we really could unlock that feeling? Like, what if there really is an inspiration engine inside us just waiting to be fired up?
Well, what I find interesting is that the article doesn't say you just make inspiration happen. It's more like you set the stage for it.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, like you're creating the right environment for it to almost breathe into you.
Right. It's funny you should say that because the article even talks about how the Latin root of inspiration is actually inspire, which literally means to breathe into. It does feel kind of magical, doesn't it?
It really does. But it gets even cooler when you think about the science behind it, which the article dives into. Like, do you know there are two major parts of our brains that come into play here? The default mode network and the executive network.
Okay. I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, think about it this way. Have you ever zoned out while you're driving a familiar route, but you still manage to get where you're going?
Oh, all the time. My mind will wander and suddenly I'm like, wait, how did I get here?
That's your default mode network kicking in. It's that part of us that daydreams, wanders, you know, that sort of thing. But then there's the executive network, which is more like our laser-focused, get stuff done mode.
Okay, I think I get it. So like when I'm really concentrating on writing these intros, that's my executive network taking over. No scenic route daydreams allowed.
Exactly. But here's the really fascinating part. Inspiration often hits when these two seemingly opposite networks actually work together. Picture this. You're on a relaxing walk. Your mind's wandering, and bam, the solution to that problem you've been stuck on just pops into your head.
Oh my gosh, yes. It's like that moment where preparation meets opportunity, but in your brain. So it's not about being in one mode or the other, but finding that sweet spot where they intersect.
Exactly. And the article goes on to talk about two types of inspiration triggers, internal and external. They're like what light the match once you've got that perfect environment for inspiration.
And it gives that great example of August Kekulé, the chemist, who figured out the benzene ring structure, all thanks to a dream about a snake biting its tail.
Right. It's amazing how our minds can pull from our existing knowledge, even if it comes from a random dream.
So basically, our dreams are like our brain's after-hours brainstorming session. But what about all those aha moments we get from actually observing the world around us?
Well, that's where external triggers come into play. Think about Isaac Newton and that whole apple falling from the tree thing. Whether or not it actually hit him on the head doesn't matter. What matters is that he observed something in his environment and it sparked a brand new connection.
So paying attention to the world around us is like gathering kindling for our inspiration fire.
Exactly. Or think about Tchaikovsky using folktales in his music. Another great example of external triggers in action. He wasn't just copying those stories, he was letting them fuel his own creative process.
It sounds like it's not just about passively waiting for inspiration to strike,
Yeah.
but actually seeking out those sparks, whether they're internal or coming from the world around us.
That's exactly right. And the best part is the article goes on to give us 15 practical tips for becoming more receptive to those sparks.
15 tips to tap into our inner inspiration engine. Okay, now we're talking. So where do we even start? What are some of the biggest takeaways from the article? So the article doesn't just talk about inspiration in theory. It's got really practical advice too. And like you know, I'm all about that. Let's dive into some of those 15 tips that really stood out.
Well, one that caught my eye was about how important it is to actually capture inspiration when it hits. You know, you get those light bulb moments and then POF, they're gone just as quickly.
Oh, tell me about it. It's so frustrating.
Right. So the article suggests keeping an idea book, like a little notebook where you can jot things down as they come to you.
It's like a treasure chest, but for your best ideas.
I love it. It reminds me of something I read about Roald Dahl, actually. He always used to carry a notebook, and he'd write down even the smallest, strangest ideas he had. And some of those little scribbles actually turned into his most famous books.
Exactly. It doesn't have to be fancy or anything, just a dedicated space to capture those sparks of inspiration. The article also mentions creating a visual inspiration board if you're more of a visual person, like magazine cutouts, photos, inspiring quotes, anything that gets your creative juices flowing.
Ooh, now that's something I could get behind. A big, beautiful inspiration board. I can practically see it now. But here's where I get a little stuck, because the article seems to give kind of conflicting advice. On one hand, it's all about how routine is key, but then it talks about how important novelty and new experiences are. So how do those two things work together when it comes to inspiration? That's where understanding those brain networks we talked about earlier comes in handy. So remember how we were talking about the executive network? Well, think of routine as being like its best friend.
Okay, I'm following you.
Routine gives us structure, it reduces decision fatigue, and helps us focus all our energy on the task at hand. It's like setting the stage for a great performance.
So having my little morning routine, like coffee, maybe a little meditation, some time with my idea book, that's me setting the stage for my executive network to really shine.
Exactly. But then imagine introducing a little element of surprise, a plot twist. That's where novelty comes in. Trying new things, exploring unfamiliar places, even something as small as taking a different route to work these things, shake up our routine and activate that default mode network.
So it's all about finding that balance between the familiar and the unexpected. Like our brains need a little bit of both predictability and surprise to really thrive.
Precisely. And this actually ties into another point the article makes about learning new things. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Learning new things, that takes effort. But here's the thing. Learning is like exercise for your brain. It literally promotes something called neuroplasticity, which is just a fancy way of saying it creates new connections and pathways in your brain.
Hold on. Are you saying that finally learning how to juggle or master that card trick I've been working on could actually make me more creative?
Absolutely. It's about challenging your mind in new ways, even if it seems totally random or silly or unrelated to your main goals, because you never know what unexpected connections you might spark. It's all about getting out of your comfort zone and embracing that beginner's mindset.
So it's not just about packing in more information. It's about becoming better at making those connections,
Yep.
right? Like we're training our brains to be more receptive to those aha moments.
Exactly. And that leads us to another fascinating point the article makes about the connection between playfulness and inspiration.
Okay, now this is something I can get behind. It talks about tapping into your inner child, embracing a sense of wonder, and not taking yourself too seriously. But how does that actually work in real life, especially at work?
Well, think of it this way. When we feel safe to play with ideas, to brainstorm without judgment, to even laugh at ourselves when we make mistakes, that's when real creativity can flourish. It's about fostering a culture of what's called psychological safety, where people feel comfortable taking risks and thinking outside the box.
It's like that saying, you can't have a rainbow without a little rain. Sometimes the best ideas come from embracing a little chaos and giving ourselves permission to mess up.
Exactly. And this actually ties into another cool point the article makes about mindfulness and observation. Now, it might seem kind of contradictory at first, right? Playfulness on one side, quiet observation on the other.
Yeah, how do those two things go together?
Well, they're both essential for spotting those little gaps in our environment, those unmet needs or opportunities for improvement that can really spark innovative ideas.
It's about noticing those moments of friction, like, ugh, there has to be a better way to do this, and seeing them not as obstacles, but as invitations for creative problem solving. The article actually uses the example of Uber. Like, can you imagine if those founders had been paying attention to their own frustration trying to hail a cab?
Right. Ride sharing as we know it might never have existed.
Mhm.
It's about training ourselves to see those everyday frustrations as opportunities for innovation. And you know what else is interesting? Sometimes those gaps aren't even about problems that need solving.
Mm.
Sometimes it's about recognizing a blank canvas where you can create something totally new.
It's about looking at the world with fresh eyes,
Aye. Right.
with a sense of curiosity and possibility.
Mhm.
And speaking of fresh eyes, the article also talks about how important it is to surround yourself with inspiring people and seek out different perspectives.
Absolutely. The people we spend our time with have a huge impact on our own thinking and creativity.
It's true, though, isn't it? Surround yourself with negativity, and you'll start to see the world through that lens, too. But if you surround yourself with people who inspire you, well, your perspective starts to shift.
It's like that saying, you become the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, but for inspiration. And it's not just about finding one mentor who's got it all figured out and trying to copy everything they do. It's about cultivating a really diverse network of inspiring figures.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Because if you're only ever exposed to one way of thinking, well, it's harder to break out of that mold and come up with something truly original, right?
Exactly. Think about it. If you're always surrounded by people who think exactly like you, it might feel comfortable, But it can also lead to creative stagnation. It's those clashes of ideas, those, wait, I never thought of it that way, moments that often lead to the most exciting breakthroughs.
It's like adding a bunch of different spices to a dish, a pinch of this, a dash of that, and suddenly you've got something really special. So how do we go about finding these inspiring figures? Do we have to join every club and go to every conference out there?
It doesn't have to be that complicated. It could be as simple as picking up a biography of someone you admire or subscribing to a podcast by a thought leader you find inspiring. Even just striking up a conversation with someone who, sees the world a little differently than you can spark new ideas. And remember, inspiration doesn't always have to come from someone you know personally. We can find it in books, movies, music. Even nature itself can be incredibly inspiring.
That reminds me, I actually get some of my best ideas when I'm out on a hike in nature. There's something about being surrounded by all that natural beauty that just seems to open up my mind. So it's not just about WHO we surround ourselves with, but also the environments we put ourselves in.
Absolutely. And that brings me to a really interesting point that the article makes at the end. What if, instead of always chasing those huge aha moments, we focused more on just cultivating the right mindset and habits so that inspiration finds us more readily?
Oh, I like that. It's like we're not just passively waiting for inspiration to strike, but we're creating an environment where it's more likely to flourish. So it's less about finding inspiration and more about becoming someone who's just naturally drawn to it.
Exactly. It's about building that inspiration engine we were talking about before. And just like any engine, it needs the right fuel, regular maintenance, and a good tune-up every now and then to run smoothly.
So what does all of this mean for you, our listeners? Well, if you're feeling uninspired, don't worry. You don't have to magically will yourself to be more creative. It's all about taking those small but consistent steps.
Exactly. Try picking one or two things from this article that really resonate with you. Like maybe you start keeping an idea book, or you try a new walking route every day, or you make an effort to connect with people who challenge your perspectives. Just remember, even the smallest actions can create a ripple effect.
It's all about trusting the process, embracing those little sparks of inspiration, and seeing where they lead. After all, the grandest creations often start with a single spark.
And remember, inspiration is often the starting point, not the finish line. The real magic happens when we take that initial spark and transform it into something real, something tangible, something that moves us closer to our full potential.
So well said. And on that inspiring note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive. Until next time, keep those creative fires burning.